A fortress wall in Scotland is not made of stone, but of glass. This is the startling reality of vitrified forts, ancient strongholds fused by a heat that should not exist. By the end of this, you will understand a mystery that has defied explanation for centuries. What could have generated a fire so fierce it melted solid rock? And was this terrifying force a weapon, an accident, or a ritual? How does the echo of such a forgotten cataclysm change the story we tell about our past? What does it mean when the ground itself holds a secret it refuses to fully surrender? Your fingers trace a surface that is unnervingly smooth, almost slippery under the cool Scottish sky. This is not weathered stone. It feels more like the glazed rim of an ancient ceramic pot, but it forms the very backbone of a defensive wall. This is vitrification in the palm of your hand, a transformation so profound it turns rock into something entirely new. Vitrification is the process where silicate rocks, like granite or sandstone, are subjected to such intense and prolonged heat that they begin to melt. The minerals within them fuse together as they cool, creating a hard, glassy crust that binds the entire structure into a single, monstrous slab. To achieve this, the temperatures needed are staggering. We are talking about a sustained inferno between 1,100 and 1,300 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, a robust bonfire might reach 800 degrees. A traditional wood-fired pottery kiln struggles to hit 1,000. What stands before you then is evidence of a blaze that rivals a modern industrial furnace, yet it was somehow accomplished over 2,000 years ago. And this is not some singular freak occurrence. From the windswept peaks of the highlands to the rolling hills of the borders, over 60 of these glass-streaked fortresses punctuate the landscape. Each one is a silent sentinel, a repeating question mark etched into the earth. Their collective presence shifts the mystery from a curious anomaly to a widespread cultural phenomenon. This was not an accident that happened once. It was something done and done repeatedly across generations. The existence of these forts immediately confronts us with a fundamental challenge to the narrative of the Iron Age. We often picture hillforts as rough assemblies of timber and dry stone, impressive for their time but ultimately understandable in their construction. The vitrified fort defies that image. It represents a level of pyrotechnical knowledge, or perhaps a confrontational necessity, that simply does not fit neatly into our historical textbooks. Why would any community go to such extraordinary, fuel-consuming lengths? What threat was so severe that the only answer was to set their own defenses on fire with a heat that could melt stone? The puzzle is not just in the how, but in the terrifying why. The first detailed account of a vitrified fort did not come from a scientist with modern instruments, but from a man armed with little more than curiosity and a notebook. In 1777, an antiquarian named John Williams stood before the ruins of a place called Kinnaird Head and tried to describe the indescribable. He wrote of ramparts that appeared to have been on fire, of stones welded together into a continuous, brittle mass. His report, published for the Royal Society, sent a quiet shock through the intellectual circles of Britain. Here was evidence that did not fit any known model. With no framework for understanding such a phenomenon, early thinkers reached for the explanations their world allowed. Some proposed extinct volcanoes, though Scotland's geology argued fiercely against it. Others whispered of druids, of ancient priests wielding mystical, earth-fusing flames in long-forgotten ceremonies. These were not wild guesses so much as honest attempts to bridge a staggering gap in knowledge, to name a power that seemed to belong more to legend than to history. This initial bewilderment gave way to a more disciplined gaze in the 19th century. The age of systematic archaeology was dawning, and the vitrified forts presented a perfect, perplexing puzzle. Researchers began the painstaking work of mapping and documenting. They climbed to the summit of Tap O Noth, one of the highest hill forts in all of Britain, and recorded how its vast walls were streaked and sealed with glossy, blackened glass. They examined the formidable ramparts of Craig Fadrig near Inverness, noting exactly where the vitrification began and ended. These early records are priceless, for they captured the sites in a state closer to their original mystery, long before the wear of modern centuries. They established the facts on the ground, creating a baseline of pure observation from which all theories would have to spring. For over 200 years, then, this has not been a forgotten oddity. It has been an open question, patiently waiting through generations, challenging each new era to bring its best tools and its boldest thinking to bear. The stage was now set, not for speculation but for a true investigation. To see them all at once is to watch a constellation of fear ignite across a map. Dozens of these glass-fused strongholds are scattered across Scotland, a stark network of fire and stone. Their placement is a masterclass in ancient strategy. They do not occupy gentle, fertile valleys. Instead, they crown isolated volcanic plugs, cling to razor-backed ridges, and command the summits of the most forbidding hills. Each location was chosen with a ruthless, defensive logic, a panoramic view for miles in every direction, ensuring no approaching force could move unseen. Steep, treacherous slopes on all sides, making any direct assault a costly nightmare. These were not just settlements, they were statements of control, built in landscapes that were already natural fortresses. The geography tells a clear and urgent story. Notice how they cluster along what would have been ancient routeways, the prehistoric highways following river valleys and mountain passes. They guard territorial boundaries like silent, stony sentinels. Significant concentrations appear in the lands of Perthshire, in the rolling hills of Aberdeenshire, and throughout the rugged expanse of the Highlands. Famous examples like Deardail, perched high above the dramatic gorge of Glen Nevis, or the Mither Tap of Benachie, its fortress walls encircling a distinctive, dome-shaped summit, are not isolated wonders. They are part of a pattern. This widespread distribution suggests a society, or a group of related societies, that lived with a pervasive sense of vulnerability. The investment required to build on these remote, difficult heights was immense. To then deliberately fuse them with fire implies the threat they faced was equally immense and persistent. So what manner of threat justifies such a drastic, permanent response? The geography pushes us toward an uncomfortable conclusion. This was not a landscape of occasional, small-scale raids. The strategic network hints at organized conflict, at territorial disputes that simmered for generations. The forts are positioned to see one another, suggesting possible systems of communication by signal fire or reflected light. A warning could leap from hilltop to hilltop faster than any warrior could run. This paints a picture of a time when the horizon was always watched, when the security of home depended on a vantage point hundreds of meters high and a wall that could, somehow, be turned to glass. The land itself, through the silent testimony of these sites, whispers of a long age of tension, but knowing where they built only deepens the central mystery. It makes the next question even more pressing. If the why seems rooted in defense and conflict, then we must confront the how. What practical method could possibly achieve such a transformative, destructive act? The search for an answer would lead investigators to attempt the impossible, to try and rebuild the past with fire. The genius of these fortresses lay not in their fiery end, but in their ingenious beginning. They were masterpieces of Iron Age engineering, built to last for generations. At their heart was a clever and widespread technique known as the timber-laced rampart. Picture a massive wall, perhaps 4 or 5 meters thick. Its outer and inner faces were built from carefully selected stones, dry, stacked with skill. But the core of the wall was not just loose rubble. Instead, a complex wooden framework was constructed inside it, a lattice of heavy beams and cross braces that held the stone shell together like a skeleton. This timber lacing gave the entire structure a flexible strength, allowing it to settle and withstand the relentless Scottish weather without crumbling. It was a brilliant solution, a signature of Celtic builders across Europe, and it transformed a simple pile of rocks into a formidable, resilient barrier. Within these formidable walls, life took shape. The scale of these communities could vary dramatically. Some forts were compact, likely housing an extended family and their livestock, a private stronghold on a lonely hill. Others were vast urban centers in their time. Take Tap O' Noth, for instance. Within its vitrified perimeter, archaeologists have identified the outlines of over 100 individual roundhouses. That is not a clan, that is a small town perched on a mountain, a bustling community of perhaps 500 souls living high above the world, protected by walls that were later fused with glass. This architectural understanding is crucial because it shifts our perspective. These were not primitive outposts. They represent a people with sophisticated organizational skills, advanced construction knowledge, and a deep connection to their landscape. They built for permanence, for legacy, which makes what happened next so profoundly counterintuitive. The very timber that gave their walls life and strength also contained the seeds of a potential catastrophe. That intricate wooden framework, sealed inside its stone tomb, was more than just a building material. In the right, or rather terribly wrong, conditions, it could become an immense reservoir of fuel. This realization leads us to the oldest and most persistent theory. Could the vitrification have been a disaster rather than a design? Could these great forts have been consumed by their own bones in a conflagration so terrible it was remembered for centuries? The search for an answer would require not just digging in the soil but playing with fire. The temperature is the true heart of the mystery. An ordinary siege fire, even a devastating one, simply cannot reach the necessary heat. Think of the hottest campfire you have ever seen, flames leaping into the night. That blaze might scorch the earth and turn wood to charcoal, but it tops out around 800 degrees Celsius. To transform solid rock into glass requires a sustained inferno hundreds of degrees hotter, a focused and roaring furnace that must be maintained for hours, perhaps even days. This is not a matter of a wall catching fire. This is a matter of engineering a specific, apocalyptic environment. The stones themselves tell the story of this intensity. In a fully vitrified section, you can see how the outer surfaces have flowed and fused, creating those distinctive glossy, bubbled textures. The heat was so profound it did not just burn the timber framework, it consumed it completely, leaving empty voids and channels within the molten stone where the wood once was. This requires a constant, rushing supply of oxygen to feed the flames, a bellows effect that is incredibly difficult to achieve by accident within a tightly packed stone wall. An accidental fire would likely smolder and choke itself out. A vitrifying fire had to breathe. In the 1930s, a pioneering archaeologist named V. Gordon Childer decided to put the accidental fire theory to the test. He directed the construction of a full-scale replica of a timber-laced rampart, then set it alight. The results were telling. The wall burned fiercely, collapsing in on itself in a great heap. The stones were blackened and cracked, yes, some showed slight surface glazing. But true, deep vitrification, the complete fusion of the entire structure into a solid glassy mass, did not occur. The experiment demonstrated a crucial gap. It proved that a simple structural fire, even a massive one, was insufficient. Something else was needed, either a deliberate enhancement of the blaze or a source of heat far beyond typical combustion. This failure points us toward a staggering realization. The people who built these forts may have also possessed the knowledge to unmake them in this specific, spectacular way. Could it have been a final, ritualistic act, a ceremonial destruction to prevent a sacred place from falling into enemy hands? Or does the sheer, focused energy involved suggest a moment of catastrophic violence so extreme it left a permanent scar on the landscape itself? The stones hold their silence, but the physics speaks loudly, insisting that what happened here was no ordinary event. The logic of this theory is stark and compelling, born from a place of absolute desperation. Picture the final days of a Hillfort community. Scouts have reported a force too large to defeat gathering in the valley below. The defenses, though strong, will eventually be overwhelmed. The leaders are faced with a terrible choice. They can surrender their home, their ancestral stronghold, to a rival clan who will occupy it, defile its sacred spaces, and use its strategic power against them. Or they can choose a different path, one of total, irreversible denial. By setting their own walls ablaze in a precise and controlled manner, they could transform their fortress from an asset into a liability. A timber-laced rampart, when fired with enough skill and fuel, would not just burn, it would collapse in on itself, its stones fusing into a brittle, glass-slicked mound. The result would be a chaotic, unstable ruin, impossible to garrison and incredibly difficult to rebuild. This would not be an act of mere destruction, but a strategic demolition. It turns the very concept of victory on its head. An attacking force might claim the hill, but they could not claim the fortress. They would be left standing atop a monument to their enemy's defiance, a useless, molten scar. This idea transforms the vitrified forts from tragic accidents into symbols of profound cultural resistance. The evidence on the ground offers some support. At many sites, the vitrification is not patchy or random. It often forms a continuous, unbroken band around the entire circuit of the defensive walls. This pattern suggests a coordinated effort, not a fire that started in one lucky spot and spread. It looks like a systematic procedure, as if teams worked around the perimeter, ensuring every section was primed to fuse. Such consistency hints at prior knowledge, at a practiced understanding of how to achieve this specific, devastating result. It frames vitrification not as a discovery made in the panic of a siege, but as a known option, a last resort passed down through generations of leaders. This theory asks us to listen for an echo of final speeches in the crackle of ancient flames. It suggests a society that placed such immense value on their places of power that they would rather see them return to the elements than let them fall into foreign hands. The act becomes a ritual of sovereignty, a statement written in fire and glass that says, "This place is ours, and if we cannot hold it, then no one will." But if this was a conscious choice, a cultural practice, it raises another haunting question. What kind of world creates a tradition where the ultimate act of defense is the annihilation of home itself? But the fire could also have come from the outside, a weapon of finality wielded by a victorious enemy. This second theory paints a scene of deliberate and overwhelming destruction. Imagine the siege is over, the defenders have fallen or fled. The conquering force now stands within the shattered gates. Their goal is not to occupy but to erase. To ensure this place can never again rise as a threat, they undertake a systematic demolition by fire. They would pile immense quantities of fuel, brushwood, timber, perhaps even animal fat or oil, against the base of the formidable timber-laced walls. Then they would set it alight, creating a funeral pyre for the fortress itself. The resulting inferno would be fed not just by their added fuel, but by the wall's own wooden skeleton, creating a self-sustaining furnace that could rage for days. Under such a sustained, vicious assault, the very stones might surrender. Certain types of rock contain minerals like feldspar or iron, which can act as natural flux agents. In a pottery kiln, a flux lowers the melting temperature of clay. In the heart of this catastrophic fire, these minerals could have done the same for the fortress walls, allowing them to vitrify at a slightly lower, yet still immense, heat. This scenario aligns with grim historical realities across many cultures, where the total annihilation of an enemy's stronghold was a powerful political and psychological statement. It was a message etched in soot and melted stone, a warning to any who might think to resist. Yet this compelling theory hits a major obstacle. If vitrification was simply a byproduct of exceptionally destructive siege warfare, why is it almost unique to Scotland? Countless hillforts across Europe, from France to Iberia to the Balkans, were stormed and burned throughout the Iron Age. Their ramparts are often found blackened and collapsed. But they are not vitrified. This pattern forces a difficult question. Were the attackers in Scotland somehow more thorough, more vengeful, or in possession of some unique knowledge of incendiary methods? Or does the very rarity of the phenomenon point us toward something distinctive about these Scottish sites themselves, perhaps the specific geology of their stones, or a cultural practice that prepared them for this transformation? The search for an answer, frustrated by conventional explanations, begins to turn toward the horizon of the extraordinary. When every earthly possibility seems to fall short, the human mind naturally reaches for something beyond the ordinary. This is where the mystery truly deepens, venturing into realms that challenge our understanding of history itself. Fire, in the ancient world, was never just a tool. It was a living force, a cleanser, a bridge between the earthly and the divine. This understanding opens a door to a third possibility, one that steps entirely away from the logic of siege and defense. What if the vitrification was not an act of destruction at all, but one of deliberate, sacred transformation? Some researchers propose we consider these sites not as ruined fortresses, but as purposefully created monuments, their glazed walls the result of a profound ceremonial act. In this view, the incredible heat was not a weapon, but a ritual instrument. The process of turning solid stone to glass could symbolize a purification, a final sealing of a place that had served its earthly purpose. Perhaps it marked the end of an era, the passing of a powerful leader whose spirit was to be permanently woven into the fabric of the hill. The community might have gathered not in panic, but in solemn ceremony, to guide a controlled, monumental fire around the walls. This fire would have been an offering, a release, transforming a functional stronghold into an eternal cenotaph, a memorial in glass and stone meant to stand for all time. This interpretation asks us to listen for a different echo in the silence. It suggests the forts were not abandoned in defeat, but retired with honor. The vitrified rampart becomes a kind of spiritual seal, making the site permanently sacred and perhaps, in the belief system of the people, inaccessible to the mundane world ever again. It shifts our focus from what was being defended to what was being commemorated. This theory finds a subtle resonance in the very pattern of the vitrification itself. The continuous, unbroken bands of fused stone could reflect a careful, ritualistic process, a slow circuit of the walls with torches, rather than the haphazard fury of an attack. It frames the immense logistical effort gathering the specialized fuel, coordinating the fire, as a communal project of deep spiritual significance, a final, collective act of devotion to the place that had sheltered them. While direct evidence for such ceremonies is elusive, buried by millennia, the idea compels us to expand our understanding of how ancient peoples related to their built environment. A fortress was not just a pile of rocks, it was a repository of memory, identity, and power. Its end, therefore, could be a sacred event. This perspective does not necessarily dismiss the other theories, but layers meaning upon them. A site ritually sealed after a leader's passing could, generations later, be misinterpreted by enemies or descendants as a place destroyed in war. The truth might be a complex tapestry where the practical and the spiritual are inextricably fused, much like the stones themselves. Yet, even this evocative interpretation cannot fully settle the debate. It still must contend with the staggering, specific physics of the act. Whether for ritual or for war, the how remains a towering question. And when conventional explanations strain against the limits of ancient technology, the human imagination inevitably looks to the skies, to possibilities that challenge the very foundations of our historical narrative. The stones themselves may not hold the only answer. Sometimes the explanation for a profound mystery lies not in human hands, but in the chaotic, untamed power of the world itself. This leads us to a fourth, more speculative line of thinking, one that asks us to consider the role of a perfect and terrible accident. Could the vitrification of these forts be the result of a natural cataclysm, a one-in-a-million convergence of elements that had nothing to do with warfare or ritual? Proponents of this idea look to the sky and the earth for forces capable of generating the required inferno. One compelling natural candidate is lightning. A direct strike on a timber-laced rampart, especially one saturated by rain, could theoretically create a phenomenon known as a fulgurate. When lightning hits sand, it instantly fuses the grains into a glassy tube. The concept here is similar but on a monumental scale. A massive bolt could superheat the moisture within the wall, generating a sudden, explosive plasma discharge with temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius, more than enough to vitrify the surface of the stones in an instant. It is a terrifying spectacle to envision, a single, deafening crack of energy from the heavens leaving a permanent, glassy scar on the landscape. Another natural possibility is wildfire. Imagine a hill fort whose slopes are thick with dry gorse and heather, or worse, sitting atop a deep layer of peat. A lightning strike or even a stray ember could ignite a blaze that would not merely sweep across the surface, but sink its roots into the ground. A peat fire can burn for weeks, even months, smoldering underground with a relentless, low-oxygen heat that can become incredibly intense. If such a fire enveloped a fort and managed to ignite its timber framework, the combination of the subterranean furnace and the wall's own fuel could create a sustained thermal event of unusual power, potentially lasting long enough to achieve localized vitrification. These natural explanations serve as a crucial reminder of nature's raw, creative destructiveness. They challenge a fundamental assumption in archaeology, that every major change in the ancient landscape must be the product of human intention. Sometimes history is shaped by chance, by a random bolt of energy or a confluence of flammable conditions that leaves behind a puzzle for future generations to solve. The idea that a natural disaster could be mistaken for a human act forces us to be humble in our interpretations. Yet, while these events cannot be entirely ruled out, they strain against the evidence. A single lightning strike would likely create a very localized patch of vitrification, not the continuous, unbroken bands we see encircling entire fortresses. A wildfire intense enough to vitrify stone would be a geological rarity in Scotland's damp climate, and yet we have over 60 sites. The odds of such extraordinary natural events repeatedly targeting only fortified hilltops, and doing so in a pattern that mimics deliberate human action, begin to feel astronomically small. This tension between the possible and the probable is where the mystery truly lies. It pushes us to look beyond the comfortable confines of known history, toward explanations that venture into the realm of the extraordinary, where the line between ancient technology and something otherworldly begins to blur. The sheer scale of the heat required forces us to ask a brutally practical question. What exactly was burning? The timber framework inside the walls is the starting point, a ready-made fuel source woven into the very fabric of the fortress. Yet when researchers run the numbers, a troubling gap emerges. The volume of wood contained in a typical timber-laced rampart, while significant, may simply not have been enough. Burning that wood in the open air would create a fierce but relatively short-lived fire. To achieve vitrification, the blaze needed to be trapped, concentrated, and sustained for an exceptionally long time, turning the wall itself into a contained furnace. This suggests the wood alone was merely the kindling, the initial spark for a much larger and more carefully managed thermal event. So what else fed the flames? The search for an answer becomes a fascinating exercise in Iron Age resource management, a forensic look at what materials these communities had on hand that could be marshaled for such a terrifying purpose. One compelling candidate is peat. Across much of Scotland, peat is not just a resource, it is the landscape itself, a dense accumulation of ancient, compacted vegetation. When dried, peat burns with a slow, intense, and smoky heat. Its great advantage is duration, a smoldering burn that can last for days, maintaining high temperatures long after ordinary wood would have reduced to ash. It is easy to envision a scenario where great stacks of cut peat bricks were piled methodically against the base of the walls, creating a thick, insulating blanket of fuel that would ignite from the timber within, and then burn with a relentless, ground-hugging intensity. This would solve the problem of sustaining the heat, but it introduces another, a problem of access and labor. Hauling tons of heavy, wet peat up to a remote hilltop is a monumental task in itself, a clear signal of immense prior planning and communal effort. Other materials might have served as accelerants. Animal fats or oils rendered from livestock could have been used to coat the timber or soaked into brushwood piled against the stones. These substances would create a hotter, more volatile initial burn, helping to push the temperature into the crucial vitrification range from the very start. Even certain types of oil-rich shale or coal, available in some parts of Scotland, could have been gathered and added to the mix. Each possibility paints a different picture of the event. A peat-fueled fire suggests a slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic process, a transformation measured in days. A fire augmented by fats or oils implies a more explosive, violent conflagration, a roaring beast unleashed upon the stones. This enigma of the fuel source is a crucial bridge between the grand theories and the gritty reality of life 2,000 years ago. It grounds the mystery in the tangible world of available materials, human labor, and environmental knowledge. It asks us to see these communities not as passive victims of mystery, but as active agents who understood their environment intimately enough to potentially harness its most destructive elements. Whether for defense, for ceremony, or for some other reason lost to time, they appear to have assembled the components for a fire beyond ordinary understanding. And if they could command such a force, what other knowledge might have vanished with them? The practical questions inevitably lead us back to the profound ones, pushing the boundaries of what we believe possible in the ancient world. The secret to the glass is not just in the fire, but in the stone itself. Not all rock is willing to melt. The transformation from solid rampart to fused glass depends on a precise and hidden recipe written into the very geology of the hill. For vitrification to occur, the stones need the right chemical ingredients, primarily silica, the same fundamental component of sand and modern glass. But silica alone is stubborn, requiring those extraordinary temperatures to flow. This is where nature provided a hidden assistant, a mineralogical catalyst known as a flux. In a traditional pottery kiln, a potter adds materials like potash or lime to the clay. These fluxes work by dramatically lowering the melting point of the silica, allowing it to fuse into a glaze at a much more manageable heat. Astonishingly, some of the stones used to build these ancient forts contain these exact same fluxing agents within them, naturally. Granites and certain sandstones can be rich in minerals like feldspar, which breaks down into potash, or they may contain pockets of calcite, a source of lime. A fortress constructed from stone with a high natural flux content would be, in essence, pre-loaded for transformation. Under the intense heat of a major fire, these internal agents would activate, drastically reducing the temperature required for the rock to begin its flow. This creates a powerful variable. One fort, built from a stone low in flux, might suffer a catastrophic fire that leaves its walls only blackened and collapsed. Another fort, just a few valleys away but constructed from a geologically luckier stone, could experience a similar fire and emerge with its ramparts permanently glazed and fused. This geological perspective reframes the entire mystery. It suggests that vitrification might not have been a guaranteed outcome of a specific human act, but rather a potential hidden within certain landscapes, waiting for the right conditions to unlock it. Modern science allows us to peer into this ancient recipe. Researchers using techniques like X-ray fluorescence can take a small sample from a vitrified wall and read its elemental signature like a chemical fingerprint. They can measure the precise levels of silica, alumina, potassium, and calcium, identifying which natural flux agents were present and active during that long-ago inferno. This analysis reveals a crucial truth. The phenomenon is not purely human, nor is it purely natural. It is a stunning intersection, a unique alchemy where human choice in building material met a specific, localized geological gift and was then subjected to a force of immense heat. The people may have chosen their hill for defense, but the hill itself may have secretly held the formula for its own metamorphosis. This turns the forts from simple monuments of conflict into collaborative artworks between culture and the earth, their final, glassy form a product of both intention and a deep, unconscious partnership with the land they stood upon. Rising nearly 2,000 feet above the rolling farmland of Aberdeenshire, Tap O' Noth is a mountain that commands the horizon. Its distinctive flat-topped summit, visible for miles in every direction, does not just hold a fort, it holds a city in the sky. The scale here is staggering, immediately setting it apart from the dozens of other vitrified sites. Encircling the crest are the remains of a massive defensive wall, its stones fused into great, dark masses of glassy slag that still catch the light after 2 millennia. Within this formidable, vitrified ring, the ground is carved into the unmistakable hollows of over 100 roundhouse platforms, each one the footprint of an ancient home. This was not a remote outpost for a single chieftain. This was a bustling, densely populated hilltop settlement, a thriving community that may have housed 500 people or more, making it one of the largest and most important power centers in all of northern Britain during the Iron Age. To stand on this summit is to feel the profound weight of a lost metropolis, a place of immense social and political gravity. The sheer effort required to sustain a population of that size at such an altitude speaks of extraordinary organization, wealth, and control over the surrounding land. This was the seat of a ruling elite, a place where decisions echoed across the glens, and it was here, at the very pinnacle of their power, that someone chose to set their world on fire. The vitrification at Tap O' Noth is not a minor scorching. It is extensive and severe, with entire sections of the rampart transformed into a continuous, brittle crust of black and green glass. The heat was so intense and so widespread that it suggests a deliberate, coordinated effort of immense proportions, a conscious decision to subject this entire symbol of authority to the forge. For a long time, the people who built this mountain fortress were shrouded in the vague label of Iron Age tribes, but recent archaeology has given them a name, and with that name comes a deeper layer of intrigue. The discoveries from the lower slopes of Tap O' Noth and the surrounding area at Rhynie have been nothing short of revolutionary. Researchers have unearthed fragments of late Roman amphorae, pieces of wine jars that journeyed all the way from the Mediterranean. They have found exquisite glass beads and fragments of fine metalwork. These are not the belongings of subsistence farmers. They are the trappings of a sophisticated elite engaged in long-distance trade and diplomacy. This evidence strongly points to the builders of Tap O' Noth being the Picts, that enigmatic confederation of peoples who later held back Roman legions and carved their unique symbol stones across the landscape. This connection changes everything. It anchors the vitrification mystery to a specific, historically attested culture known for their resilience and their fierce independence. The fire that fused the stones of Tap O Noth was not some anonymous event. It was a cataclysm that struck at the very heart of Pictish society in this region. Was it the result of a brutal internecine war between rival Pictish kingdoms? Could it have been a ritual sealing of a sacred royal site after the passing of a great leader? Or was it a final, desperate act of denial against an overwhelming external threat, perhaps even a prelude to the Roman conflicts that would later define Pictish history? The artifacts show a society at its peak, connected to the wider world and flush with prestige. The vitrified wall shows that same society confronting an existential crisis. At Tap O Noth, the abstract theories of warfare, ritual, and accident collide with the hard, tangible evidence of a real place and a known people. The mystery is no longer just about heat and stone. It is about the fate of a nation poised on the edge of history. While Tap O Noth speaks of a populous citadel, the mystery takes a different, more haunting form in the shadow of Britain's highest mountain. Perched on a steep, isolated knoll high above the dramatic gorge of Glen Nevis, Deardail feels less like a fortress and more like a sentinel of fire. Its name itself is a whisper from legend, often translated from the Gaelic as the Fort of the Fire Spirit or the Fort of the Red Eye. This is a place where the physical evidence and the mythic memory are so tightly interwoven they become impossible to separate. The approach to the site is a journey into raw, powerful landscape, a climb that ends with a breathtaking and somewhat dizzying vista over the roaring river far below. The strategic value is obvious, a perfect defensive position that commands the entire pass. But the feeling here is not of a bustling town. It is of a watchful, perhaps lonely, outpost charged with a specific, solemn duty. The vitrification at Deardail presents a crucial clue that sets it apart. Unlike the continuous, encircling bands seen at Tap O Noth, the fused stone here appears in specific, concentrated sections of the wall. It is not uniform. Some stretches of the rampart show severe, glassy transformation, while adjacent sections remain as dry stone, merely blackened by heat. This pattern is a vital piece of evidence, a fingerprint left by the event itself. To an archaeologist, this selective vitrification suggests a more targeted application of heat. It could point toward a siege where attackers focused their incendiary efforts on a few key weak points, perhaps where gates or wooden reinforcements were known to be. Alternatively, it might indicate a controlled, experimental burn, an attempt by the inhabitants themselves to strengthen or seal only particular vulnerable sections of their defenses. The fire at Deardail was not an all-consuming wave, it was a precise, if still devastating, tool. This specificity pulls the site back from pure legend into the realm of tactical human action. Yet, the legends refuse to be silenced. Deardail is deeply entwined with the tragic Celtic tale of Deardail of the Sorrows, a figure of immense beauty and ill-fated love. In some versions of the myth, this very fort is said to be her refuge or her prison, and its fiery end is tied to her story of passion and loss. The folklore speaks of a great conflagration, a blaze so intense it could be seen for miles, a fitting origin for a name invoking a fire spirit. This is where the site becomes a powerful metaphor for the entire mystery. The targeted vitrification gives us the hard, archaeological fact, the objective what. The legend of Deardail and the fire spirit offers a narrative, a cultural why, a way for generations to remember and make sense of a cataclysmic event that scarred both the land and the collective memory. One does not necessarily disprove the other, instead they perform a delicate dance. The archaeology confirms a great fire did indeed happen here, just as the story says. The story, in turn, imbues that physical fact with emotional and cultural meaning, transforming a forgotten siege or ritual into an epic of love, betrayal, or divine wrath. Deardail teaches us that our search for answers cannot be confined to soil samples and temperature charts alone. We must also listen to the stories, for they are the lasting echo of the event, a people's own interpretation of the terrifying power that fused their world into glass. The site stands as a permanent monument to this intersection, where every scan of a vitrified slab is also a reading of an ancient, enduring poem. Theories remain just stories until they are tested by fire. This is the domain of experimental archaeology, a field where researchers step out of the library and into the role of ancient builders, using their hands to ask questions of the past. In the 1980s, a team led by archaeologist Ian Ralston decided to confront the vitrification mystery head-on. They did not just study the old forts, they built a new one. On a windswept Scottish hillside, they constructed a full-scale replica of a timber-laced rampart, carefully selecting stones with the right mineral content and weaving a wooden framework into its heart. Then, with modern instruments recording every degree, they set it ablaze. The results were a landmark moment in understanding. The experiment proved beyond any doubt that deliberate human action could create vitrification. In several sections of the test wall, the stones did indeed fuse, forming a recognizable glassy crust. But the process revealed something just as important: the immense difficulty. This was not a matter of simply tossing a torch. To reach and maintain the critical temperature, the team had to constantly feed the fire for hours, meticulously stoking it to ensure the heat penetrated deep into the stone core. It required specific types of rock that contained natural fluxing agents and an enormous volume of fuel, far beyond the timber inside the wall itself. The successful vitrification was a triumph of controlled, determined effort, not a casual or accidental outcome. This hands-on research provides a crucial bridge between our speculative theories and the tangible reality of the Iron Age. It translates abstract ideas about thousand-degree fires into the language of practical logistics, of backbreaking labor, and of precise environmental knowledge. We can now quantify the challenge. To vitrify even a modest section of wall would have required a small army of people gathering and hauling tons of additional fuel, likely peat or brushwood, up that steep hill. It would have required teams working in shifts through day and night to manage the blaze, directing its fury with an almost ritualistic care. The experiments show us that if this was an act of war, it was a calculated, premeditated siege against one's own home, demanding immense organization. If it was a ceremony, it was a communal undertaking of staggering scale and solemn purpose. This data grounds the mystery in the sweat and soot of real human experience. It tells us that the people who achieved this were not passive victims of a mysterious force. They were active commanders of a terrifying technology. They possessed not just the will, but the sophisticated understanding of materials, thermodynamics, and labor coordination to bend stone to their purpose, whether that purpose was denial, commemoration, or something else we have yet to comprehend. The echo of their ancient fire now has a modern counterpart, a controlled burn that illuminates not just stone, but the profound capabilities of a lost world. The charcoal trapped within the glassy slag holds a hidden clock. When we ask when these walls burned, science turns to the tiny fragments of wood that fueled the inferno, using the steady decay of radiocarbon to pinpoint their final moment. The dates retrieved from various forts across Scotland tell a compelling and surprisingly patient story. Most of the vitrification events cluster within a broad window, from roughly 700 years before the Common Era to around 300 years after it. This places the phenomenon squarely within the dynamic and often turbulent Iron Age, a period spanning a full millennium, yet the timeline is not a single, sharp line. The dates from different sites scatter across this long stretch of time like embers from separate fires. One fort may have burned in 500 BC, while another, just 50 miles away, might not have met its fiery transformation until 200 AD. This chronological spread is a revelation with profound implications. It definitively rules out the idea of a single, Scotland-wide cataclysm, a sudden disaster that struck every hilltop at once. Instead, the evidence sketches a picture of a recurring event, a practice or a response that flared up in different places for different reasons over the course of many generations. This extended timeline transforms our understanding. It means vitrification was not a forgotten secret known to one specific tribe and then lost. It was a possibility that remained present within the cultural knowledge of these communities for centuries, a known option that could be activated when circumstances demanded. Establishing this chronology allows us to place these silent events alongside the sparse historical records and climatic data we have for the period. Could a cluster of later dates correspond with the increasing pressure from Roman incursions into southern Scotland, a time of heightened conflict and desperate measures? Might earlier fires align with periods of climatic shift or regional unrest that reshaped power dynamics? The timeline does not give us easy answers, but it provides a framework, a temporal map on which we can overlay other fragments of the past. It tells us that the people who built Deardail and those who fortified Tap O Noth, though separated by perhaps hundreds of years, shared a common, terrible knowledge of what fire could do to stone. This long arc suggests the reasons for vitrification may have evolved over time, from an early ritual practice to a later, more strategic act of denial, all while utilizing the same awe-inspiring technique. The fires were not a moment in history, but a thread woven through it, a recurring echo of crisis or ceremony that left its permanent mark on the high places, one generation at a time. The people who walked these glass-strewn ramparts were not a single, monolithic culture. They were a tapestry of tribes and confederations, known to us by names given by outsiders like the Picts or by the shared artistic language we call Celtic. Their world was one of small, fiercely independent kingdoms, each with its own ruling lineage of chieftains and elite warriors. Power was personal, earned through martial prowess, generosity, and a perceived connection to the other world. Their lives were etched into the land itself, from the intricate spiral patterns on their metalwork to the very hilltops they chose to fortify. In this context, a hill fort was far more than a military installation. It was the beating heart of a community's identity. It was a place of safety for people and livestock in times of threat, a venue for feasts that reinforced social bonds, and a permanent, towering advertisement of a chieftain's strength and reach. To build one was to claim a piece of the landscape forever. To lose one was an unthinkable catastrophe. This is why the act of vitrification, whether chosen or inflicted, resonates with such profound gravity. It was not merely the destruction of a building, it was an attack on the very nucleus of social order. If a fort like Tap O Noth, with its hundreds of residents, was suddenly rendered a smoldering, glassy ruin, the repercussions would ripple across the entire region. The ruling family's authority would be shattered along with their walls. The community's sense of security would evaporate. The delicate balance of tribute and loyalty that held the tribal kingdom together could collapse overnight, leaving a power vacuum that rivals would rush to fill. The event would be remembered not as a fire but as a fall. This understanding transforms the vitrified stone from a physical curiosity into a cultural document. These fused walls are monuments to a specific worldview, one where place, power, and people were inseparable. The incredible effort invested in both building and potentially unmaking these forts speaks to values that are almost alien to our modern sense of property. The land was not real estate, it was legacy. A stronghold was a living extension of the lineage that held it. Its fate, therefore, was inextricably tied to the fate of the people themselves. To comprehend the silent scream locked within that glass, we must first hear the vibrant, complex, and fragile world that existed before the flames. The glassy ramparts stand as undeniable proof of an inferno, yet step inside the enclosure and the story grows quieter. A curious puzzle confronts archaeologists at many vitrified sites. Given the catastrophic heat required to fuse stone, one would expect the interior to be a wasteland of destruction, a uniform layer of ash and melted debris. But that is often not what they find. The evidence inside the fort can be surprisingly sparse. There is a notable absence of other intensely burnt materials like melted glass beads, slagged metal tools, or widespread, thick strata of charcoal from completely incinerated roundhouses. If the walls were subjected to a furnace, why isn't everything within them equally scorched? This discrepancy between the monumental transformation of the defenses and the more modest traces inside is a silent clue that fuels deep debate. It forces us to reconsider the nature of the fire itself. One compelling interpretation is that the conflagration was not a random, all-consuming wildfire that swept over the entire hilltop. Instead, it may have been a meticulously focused event, its fury directed almost exclusively at the timber-laced ramparts. Picture teams of people piling fuel specifically against the base of the walls, creating a contained, ring-shaped furnace. The heat would have roared upward and inward, vitrifying the stone shell, while the open interior, shielded by the very walls themselves, might have been spared the very worst of the thermal onslaught. This scenario aligns with the idea of a deliberate, controlled demolition, where the goal was to destroy the defensive capability of the fort, not necessarily every dwelling within it. Another possibility is that the interior was cleared before the burning. In a ritualistic context, valuable items and perhaps even the remains of structures could have been removed as part of a ceremonial closing. If the act was one of strategic denial during a retreat, the inhabitants would have taken everything of use with them, leaving behind empty shells of houses to burn. What fire then touched inside might have been less intense, leaving only faint traces. We must also account for the relentless work of time. Centuries of wind, rain, and soil formation on these exposed hilltops can erode and scatter the delicate evidence of a single event. A thin layer of ash from a thatch roof burning could simply wash away over generations, while the monumental, fused stone of the wall endures. This absence is not proof that nothing happened inside. It is a reminder that the archaeological record is a fragmentary manuscript with many pages missing. It cautions us against assuming a single, uniform catastrophe. The silent interior, juxtaposed with the screaming stone of the walls, suggests a fire of terrifying precision, a controlled burn of almost surgical intent. Whether that intent was born of strategy, ceremony, or something else, the gap in the evidence itself becomes a kind of evidence, pointing toward a conscious hand guiding the flames. The story of vitrified forts does not end at Scotland's shores. While the Scottish examples are the undisputed epicenter of this mystery, faint echoes of the same phenomenon can be found scattered across the European continent and beyond. In the highlands of the massive Central in France, a handful of hillforts exhibit sections of stone fused by intense heat. Similar, isolated reports come from ancient sites in Germany and even as far east as Turkey. These international counterparts are crucial to the investigation, for they provide a vital control group, a way to test whether the conditions that created Scotland's glassy ramparts were a bizarre local fluke or part of a wider, if rare, ancient reality. The first and most striking difference is one of scale. The Scottish examples number in the dozens, forming a clear and concentrated pattern. The sites elsewhere are few and far between, often singular curiosities within their own regions. Furthermore, the degree of vitrification abroad is frequently less pronounced, sometimes appearing as only a slight surface glazing on a few stones, rather than the massive, continuous fused cores seen at Tap o' Noth or Deardail. This immediate contrast tells us that whatever forces were at work in Scotland, they were operating at a frequency and intensity unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. Yet the very existence of these distant sites demands a comparative analysis. When we look closely at these French, German, and Turkish forts, what common threads emerge? The most significant link is architectural. Like their Scottish cousins, many of these foreign sites also utilized timber-laced rampart construction. This shared building technique is the foundational ingredient, the necessary canvas upon which the phenomenon could occur. It suggests that the potential for vitrification was an inherent, if hidden, risk in this specific style of fortification, a built-in vulnerability that could be triggered under the right or terribly wrong conditions. Geographic setting offers another parallel. These international forts also tend to occupy defensively dominant positions, high on hills or volcanic outcrops, places exposed to the elements and potentially to catastrophic wildfires or lightning strikes. This points toward environmental factors that could transcend human culture, a natural convergence of flammable architecture and a landscape prone to extreme thermal events. However, the sheer scarcity of vitrified sites outside Scotland argues powerfully against a purely natural explanation being universally applicable. If it were simply a matter of lightning or wildfire hitting a timber-laced wall, we would expect to find these glassy ruins scattered much more evenly across Europe, wherever that construction method was used. We do not. This uneven global distribution pushes us toward a more cultural interpretation. It suggests that while the potential for vitrification existed wherever such forts were built, the actual act of achieving it may have required a specific cultural intention, a deliberate knowledge of how to push a fire beyond a normal destructive blaze into the realm of transformative heat. Perhaps in Scotland, this knowledge became embedded in the practices of the Picts and other tribes, a known ritual or strategic option that was culturally transmitted and repeatedly enacted over centuries. In other regions, the same architectural vulnerability may have only rarely, and likely accidentally, been pushed to its extreme limit. This global perspective is a necessary corrective to isolation. It prevents us from viewing Scotland's forts as a completely unique supernatural anomaly, and instead places them on a broader spectrum of ancient engineering and its unintended, or perhaps fully intended, consequences. They become the most intense expression of a rare but repeatable phenomenon, a testament to a specific intersection of human ingenuity, geological chance, and either profound desperation or deep spiritual belief. The search for a single, unifying answer now stretches across continents, asking us to weigh the common threads of stone and timber against the unique tapestry of each culture that built upon them. Climate is the silent character in this story, the backdrop against which every human drama unfolds. The Iron Age in Scotland was not a period of static weather, but one of significant climatic shifts that would have directly shaped the lives of those who built the Hillforts. Paleoclimatology, the science of reading ancient climates through tree rings, ice cores, and soil layers, reveals a landscape in flux. During the centuries when many forts were built and later burned, the region experienced a pronounced downturn known as the sub-Atlantic period. This brought cooler summers, harsher winters, and notably increased rainfall. Imagine the impact on a society living on marginal highland soil. Growing seasons would shorten, harvests could fail, and the pressure on grazing land for livestock would intensify. In such an environment, resources become everything, and the communities that controlled the most fertile valleys or the most defensible storehouses held the keys to survival. This creeping environmental stress could have been a powerful engine for conflict, turning low-level rivalries into desperate struggles for sustenance and territory. The Hillforts, already symbols of power, would have become even more critical, and the consequences of losing one even more catastrophic. It is within this tense, pressurized context that we must consider the fires. But climate's role may be even more direct. While a wetter overall trend might seem to discourage fire, it is the extremes within that trend that matter most. Could a series of unusually dry, hot summers, a drought within a generally cool epoch, have parched the landscape? The thick timber frameworks inside the ramparts designed for strength would have slowly baked in the sun, becoming a perfect reservoir of tinder. In such a state, a single spark, whether from a cooking fire, a lightning strike, or an attacker's torch, could ignite a blaze of unprecedented ferocity, one that might burn with a speed and heat that shocked even those who set it. Conversely, a period of intense storm activity could have increased the frequency of lightning strikes on these exposed hilltops. A single, massive bolt hitting a timber-laced wall could deliver a flash of energy so concentrated it might locally fuse stone in an instant, creating a vitrified patch that later generations would struggle to explain. The key insight from paleoclimatology is not that climate caused the vitrification, but that it set the stage. It created the preconditions of scarcity and tension that made conflict more likely, and it could have produced the specific, rare weather events that turned a dangerous fire into a transformative one. The people of the Iron Age were not passive observers of their environment. They were deeply attuned to its rhythms and its threats. Their decision to build on high ground, to invest in formidable walls, and perhaps even their knowledge of how to unleash a defensive inferno, were all responses to a world that could be both bountiful and brutally unforgiving. The glass in the ramparts, then, might be read as a fossilized moment where human history intersected with a fleeting, terrible alignment of atmospheric conditions. It reminds us that to understand the choices of the past, we must first feel the wind and the cold and taste the fear of a failing harvest on the air. A community does not forget a fire that melts stone. In the absence of written history, the memory of such an event transforms, finding a home not in textbooks, but in the rich tapestry of folklore. Long after the last embers cooled, the people of Scotland looked upon these glass-strewn ramparts and saw not a puzzle for scientists, but the work of otherworldly hands. The forts became woven into tales of supernatural beings, of fairy smiths working in hidden forges beneath the hills, and of gods who walked the earth wielding fire as a weapon. These stories are far more than simple fantasy. They are a form of cultural memory, a powerful attempt to explain the inexplicable, to give a name and a reason to a phenomenon that defied ordinary understanding. When faced with a wall turned to glass by a heat beyond any forge, what else could it be but magic? The legends served a vital purpose. They preserved the core truth of the event, the shock, the awe, the sheer transformative power, while encoding it in a metaphorical language that could be passed down for generations. A tale about a fairy king sealing his palace in a single, fiery night is in its essence a record of a cataclysm. It is how a community says, something tremendous happened here, something that changed the very nature of this place forever. We see this process vividly at Deardail, whose name is deeply entwined with the tragic Irish legend of Deardail of the Sorrows. In the myth, Deardail is a woman of prophetic beauty destined for a life of grief. Some versions of her story place her final refuge or her prison within a fort that is ultimately consumed by flames. The site becomes a monument to her sorrow, and the vitrification is the physical manifestation of that consuming, tragic fire. Here, geology and poetry meet. The archaeological fact of a great, selective conflagration finds its echo in a story of passion, loss, and fiery end. The legend does not describe the technical process of heating stone to 1,200 degrees. Instead, it captures the emotional and cultural resonance of the event. It answers the human question of why with a narrative of heartbreak and fate, which for a pre-scientific society was often a more meaningful answer than a list of physical causes. This pattern repeats across the landscape. Other vitrified forts are linked to figures like the Cailleach, a divine hag of winter and creation in Gaelic myth, who could reshape mountains with a strike of her staff. Could a story of her wrath be a folk memory of a natural disaster, like a lightning strike of godlike force? Another tale speaks of a fort where a king offended the fairy folk, and in retaliation they caused the stones to run like water. These narratives rationalize the mystery by placing its origin in a realm beyond human control, in the actions of capricious and powerful beings. Analyzing these legends offers us a unique window into how later generations perceived these sites. They show a universal human need to weave narrative around mystery, to fill the silent gaps in history with stories that make the world feel ordered and meaningful. The folklore transforms a frightening, unexplained ruin into a place with a story, a place that belongs within the known cosmology of the people. It turns an object of fear or confusion into an object of cultural heritage, a landmark in the story of the land itself. In doing so, these tales performed a subtle kind of preservation. They ensured that the vitrified forts were never truly forgotten, that they remained as fixtures in the oral map of Scotland, waiting for a time when new tools and new questions could begin to separate the metaphor from the moment of intense, real heat that inspired it all. The stones hold their secrets in a language of chemistry and crystal. To translate that language, modern science has assembled a quiet arsenal of non-invasive tools, each one designed to listen without disturbing the ancient silence. X-ray diffraction, often called XRD, is one of the most powerful. This technique does not simply look at the rock, it peers into its very atomic architecture. By directing a beam of X-rays at a tiny sample of vitrified material, scientists can analyze how the rays scatter. This scattering pattern acts like a fingerprint, revealing the exact crystalline structure of the minerals within. The crucial insight here is that minerals change their crystal form at specific, known temperatures. By identifying which minerals are present and in what state, XRD can provide a remarkably precise estimate of the maximum heat the stone endured. It tells us not just that it was hot, but exactly how hot, pinning down those staggering figures of 1,200 degrees or more with hard data. This turns a theoretical temperature into a measurable fact, a cornerstone for any credible explanation. Alongside XRD, spectroscopic methods act as chemical detectives. Techniques like X-ray fluorescence can scan a sample and instantly identify its elemental composition. It can detect the faintest traces of potassium, calcium, or sodium, the natural flux agents that help the rock melt at a lower temperature. This analysis can answer a pivotal question. Was this fort built from stone that was predisposed to vitrify? By comparing samples from vitrified and non-vitrified sections of the same wall, or from different forts entirely, researchers can map the geological recipe that made the transformation possible. It moves the discussion from speculation about fuel to the grounded reality of local geology, showing how human choice in building material intersected with hidden chemical potential. The investigation extends beyond the visible walls themselves. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth, painting a picture of what lies beneath the turf without a single shovel cut. It can reveal the buried foundations of walls, the outlines of lost roundhouses, or pits that might have held storage or ceremonial deposits. This allows archaeologists to understand the full layout of a site, to see where people lived and worked in relation to the scorched ramparts. Even more intriguing is the potential use of thermal imaging. While the fires died millennia ago, some researchers theorize that a cataclysm of such intensity might have altered the thermal properties of the soil and stone in a lasting way. Subtle differences in how the sun warms the ground or how heat dissipates at night could theoretically be detected by sensitive infrared cameras, hinting at the ghostly outline of that ancient furnace. This quiet revolution in methodology is fundamentally changing the conversation. Each data point from a spectrometer or XRD machine acts as a constraint, a boundary of reality that limits where our imaginations can wander. The hard evidence of mineralogy and temperature pushes back against the most fanciful theories, not by disproving them outright, but by demanding they account for the physical facts. We are no longer just interpreting ruins, we are decoding a material record written in fused silica and crystallized minerals. The story is becoming less about what we can imagine happened, and more about what the stones themselves insist did happen. This scientific patience is building, layer by layer, a more accurate and humble picture of a past where people commanded a force that still, even with all our tools, leaves us in awe. The glass that once flowed like water is now frozen in time, a fragile relic of that ancient fire. This paradox lies at the heart of preserving these sites. The vitrified material is incredibly hard, yet it possesses a glass-like brittleness. It is vulnerable to the very elements it has defied for 2 millennia. Scotland's climate is its greatest adversary. The relentless cycle of winter freeze and spring thaw is a slow, insidious force. Water seeps into microscopic cracks in the glassy slag, expands as it turns to ice, and exerts a pressure that can split the fused stone from within, grain by grain. This process, repeated over countless seasons, steadily prizes the monuments apart. Alongside the weather, life itself encroaches. Roots from heather, gorse, and even small trees can work their way into the masonry, seeking moisture and nutrients. As they grow and thicken, they act as natural wedges, displacing stones and destabilizing entire sections of wall. This biological pressure, while a beautiful part of the natural reclamation of the site, is a direct threat to the structural integrity of the archaeological record. Perhaps the most modern threat comes from the feet of admirers. Increased interest, while wonderful, brings more visitors to these remote places. Unintentional damage occurs when people climb on the unstable walls to get a better view or a photograph, dislodging stones that have held their place for centuries. The desire to take a small piece of the mystery home, a souvenir chip of the strange glassy rock, erodes the site in a literal and irreversible way. Each fragment removed is a piece of the puzzle lost forever. Conservation, therefore, is a delicate and constant balancing act. The goal is rarely full restoration, which would destroy the historical authenticity of the place. Instead, experts aim for what is termed managed decay. This philosophy accepts that these are ruins, that time will have its effect, but intervenes strategically to slow that process to a near standstill. It involves meticulous monitoring, photographing cracks to see if they widen from year to year. It means carefully controlling vegetation, sometimes removing larger root systems, but often allowing low-growing plants to stabilize the soil. For foot traffic, the solution is often subtle guidance, using small, low stone barriers or discrete paths to steer visitors away from the most fragile areas while still allowing access to experience the awe of the place. In rare cases, limited stabilization is necessary. This might involve carefully repointing loose stones with a lime mortar that is visually distinct from the original work, or inserting a discrete support to prevent a vital section from collapsing. Every action is documented, reversible if possible, and taken with the utmost respect for the site's integrity. The true challenge is preserving the aura of the mystery itself. These are not sanitized museum exhibits. Their power lies in their raw, evocative presence on a windswept hilltop, in the tangible connection to a profound and unanswered question. Protecting them is an act of safeguarding not just ancient stone, but an ongoing conversation with the past. It is ensuring that future generations can still stand in the wind, touch the strange, slick surface, and feel the same chill of wonder, confronted by a riddle written in fire and glass that still awaits its final solution. The true legacy of these glass-strewn hills is not just a mystery, but a profound challenge to our historical imagination. We often speak of technological progress as a linear march, a clear path from simple tools to complex machines. The vitrified forts stand directly across that path, a silent and stubborn monument that does not fit the timeline. Whether born from a desperate strategy, a sacred rite, or a catastrophic accident, these sites bear witness to a command of fire that borders on the alchemical. To generate and sustain a heat exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius is not a casual achievement. It is an industrial one. Think of the control required, the understanding of airflow to feed such a contained inferno, the management of fuel on a staggering scale. This implies a practical, hands-on knowledge of materials and thermodynamics that we simply do not see reflected in the more common artifacts of the era, the pottery or the iron tools. Those objects speak of skill, but the forts speak of a force harnessed, a momentary leap into a realm of transformation that feels centuries ahead of its time. This forces a vital recalibration. It pushes firmly back against any lingering notion of these Iron Age communities as primitive or simplistic. There is nothing primitive about deliberately turning a stone wall into a unified slab of glass. The act, in any interpretation, reveals a people with a sophisticated and intimate dialogue with their environment. They understood the hidden potential within their local stone, the burning properties of peat and timber, and the behavior of fire on a monumental scale. They possessed the organizational capacity to coordinate the labor for such an undertaking, marshalling resources and human effort toward a single, terrifying goal. This was not a society stumbling in the dark, but one capable of producing a phenomenon that still, with all our analytical tools, resists a single, comfortable explanation. Their knowledge may have been of a different kind than our own, not written in manuals but embedded in practice, passed down through generations of builders and firekeepers. It was a knowledge deeply contextual, born from specific places and specific needs, which is perhaps why it vanished so completely from the record. The forts remind us that history is not merely the story of the technologies that survived to evolve into our own, but also of those brilliant, specialized dead ends, those flashes of profound understanding that were lost when the culture that nurtured them changed or fell. In their silent, glazed walls, we are confronted not with a lack, but with a different kind of fullness, a testament to a forgotten branch of human ingenuity that chose, or was forced, to wield the very essence of the forge against the bones of the earth. The glass did not flow evenly. This is one of the most telling and puzzling details on the ground. At a site like Deardail, you can stand before a stretch of rampart that is utterly transformed, its stones fused into a dark, glossy mass. Then you take 5 steps to the left, and the wall is simply dry stone, blackened by soot but otherwise intact. Why would a fire of supposedly apocalyptic intensity skip a section? This selective vitrification is a clue written in stone, and it challenges every simple explanation. It suggests the heat was not a uniform blanket, but a targeted application. Perhaps it indicates where additional fuel was piled, or where the timber framework inside the wall was most dense and dry, creating a hotter, longer-lasting burn. It might even point to the builder's own hand, revealing an experimental or partial attempt to strengthen only the most vulnerable points of their defenses. Each patch of glass and each stretch of ordinary stone is a sentence in an unfinished story, asking us to look closer. This leads to a deeper, more philosophical question. From our modern viewpoint, a vitrified fort looks like a ruin, a catastrophe. But we must ask, did the people who created it see it that way? If the act was deliberate, was it considered a success? A wall fused into a solid, brittle slab is certainly no longer functional as a defensive barrier in the traditional sense. It cannot be easily repaired or garrisoned. In a purely military sense, that looks like a failure. But if the goal was not to save the fortress, but to deny it utterly to an enemy, then the creation of a permanent, useless scar was the ultimate success. It achieved a different kind of objective, one of total and symbolic refusal. Alternatively, if the goal was ritualistic, the success would be measured in spiritual terms, not practical ones. The transformation of the wall from a mundane structure into a permanent, glazed monument might have been the entire point, a perfect and solemn conclusion. We are judging an ancient act by our own values of utility and preservation, when their values may have been anchored in concepts of honor, sovereignty, or sacred duty that we can only glimpse. The very fact that the process was repeated across Scotland for centuries implies it fulfilled a need, that in the context of their world, it worked. This is why the trowels and brushes are still at work. The mystery is not locked in the past, it is actively being pursued. New excavations, like the ongoing work at the mighty Tap o' Noth, are not just digging deeper, they are asking smarter questions. Archaeologists now use techniques like soil micromorphology, taking tiny, undisturbed blocks of earth from inside the fort and examining them under a microscope. This can reveal the faintest traces of activity, the ghost of a floor surface, the minuscule fragments of burnt thatch or food waste that tell us exactly how the interior was used in its final days. Each fragment of charcoal pulled from the vitrified layer is not just fuel, it is a time capsule, its tree ring pattern potentially revealing not just the date, but the local climate conditions in the tree's final years. Was it a period of drought that made the landscape a tinderbox? Every season of fieldwork has the potential to turn a theory on its head. A single discovery, a new pattern in the distribution of artifacts, or a revolutionary analysis of the slag chemistry could suddenly make an old idea untenable and open a door to a completely new understanding. The story of the vitrified forts is therefore still being written, not in ink but in data. It is driven by a quiet, dedicated community of archaeologists, geologists, and historians who treat each site as a crime scene from the deep past. They piece together the puzzle, one soil sample, one laser scan, one revised theory at a time. There is no single genius about to crack the case, but rather a collective, gradual sharpening of the picture. This is the true nature of historical discovery, a patient conversation with the land, where each answer carefully uncovered leads to two more thoughtful questions. The forts remain high on their hills, not as closed books, but as open manuscripts, waiting for the next page to be carefully turned by a hand in the present, guided by the light of a fire that burned over 2,000 years ago. The wind on a Scottish hilltop has a voice all its own, a low, constant rush that seems to carry whispers from the past. To stand before the vitrified rampart of Craig Fadrig, your fingers tracing the unnervingly smooth, glassy surface, is to feel the mystery shift from an intellectual puzzle to a physical presence. This is not a story confined to books or screens. It is embedded in the land, waiting for anyone willing to make the climb. Accessible sites like Craig Fadrig, just outside Inverness, or the formidable ridge of Knockfarrell in Easter Ross, offer more than just a history lesson. They provide a journey. The walk itself is part of the understanding, a gradual ascent through whispering pine forests or across open moorland that allows the modern world to fall away step by step. Reaching the summit is its own reward, with panoramic views that stretch for miles, revealing exactly why this spot was chosen. You see the strategic logic laid out before you like a map, the control of river valleys and ancient routes. Then you turn, and there it is, the wall. Up close, the vitrification reveals its textures, the bubbled, slag-like crust, the way some stones seem to have flowed into one another like candle wax. The contrast between the rough, untouched rocks and these slick, dark patches is startling. You are not just looking at evidence, you are touching the result of that ancient, unimaginable heat. It is a connection across 2,000 years, a silent conversation between your curiosity and the stone's enduring riddle. To visit responsibly is to honor that conversation. These sites are protected monuments, fragile despite their apparent strength. Stick to established paths to prevent erosion and never climb on the walls themselves. The glassy material is brittle, and the weight of a person can dislodge stones that have held their place for centuries. Let your eyes be the only tool you use to take something away, capturing the memory and the feeling, not a fragment of the fort. What you are looking for is not a single clue, but the totality of the place. Notice the layout, how the walls follow the contour of the hill. Look for the differences in the stonework, the vitrified sections alongside the ordinary. Find a spot to sit quietly and simply listen to the wind in the grass. This is where the theories you have learned settle into something deeper, a personal encounter with a landscape that holds its secrets close. The value of this experience is immeasurable. It transforms abstract debates about temperature and intention into a tangible chill of wonder. It reminds us that history is not a list of dates, but a series of lived moments in specific places, and some of those places still hold the echo of their most dramatic instant. To walk these hills is to follow in the footsteps of the very people who built, defended, and perhaps ultimately transformed these strongholds, and to feel, if only for a moment, the weight of the choices they faced beneath the same vast Scottish sky. The scattered clues begin to align, not into a single, blinding answer, but into a more profound and human story. The strategic hilltops, the ingenious timber-laced walls, the locally sourced stones rich in fluxing minerals, and the staggering heat required. These are not separate mysteries. They are interconnected threads in a single tapestry of life, belief, and survival in a distant age. When we weave them together, the most compelling picture that emerges is not one of pure accident, nor of a single-minded military tactic, but of a profound cultural practice. It was a deliberate, ritualistic act of transformation, reserved for moments of ultimate crisis. This synthesis asks us to see the event through the eyes of the community. The Hillfort was more than a stronghold. It was the heart of their identity, a place woven with generations of memory. In a time of existential threat, perhaps from an overwhelming enemy or at the passing of a revered leader, the choice to simply abandon it might have been unthinkable. Surrender was a spiritual defeat. Instead, a different, more absolute path was chosen, a ceremonial unmaking. Using their deep environmental knowledge, they would gather the necessary fuels, perhaps peat and brush from their own land. With solemn purpose, they would set the great timber bones of their home ablaze, not in panic, but as a final, sacred offering. The goal was likely the complete and symbolic destruction of the site's functional power, to prevent its desecration or to release the spirit of the place. The spectacular vitrification, the melting of stone into glass, was probably not the guaranteed objective every time. It was the rare and breathtaking byproduct, occurring only when every element aligned perfectly, when the stones held the right chemistry, when the fuel burned long and hot enough, when the wind and weather conspired to create a contained furnace. Most such ceremonial fires may have left behind only ash and collapsed stone. But in those extraordinary instances where the hidden recipe in the geology met the fury of the flames, the land itself answered with a transformation so complete it has echoed for millennia. This narrative does not give us a tidy, one-word solution. Instead, it offers a nuanced understanding that respects the complexity of the past and the elegant, terrifying interplay between human intention, cultural belief, and the raw, creative power of the physical world. The forts become not failures but fulfilled intentions, their glassy walls a testament to a value system where honoring a place could mean guiding it into a new, eternal form. The glassy ramparts do not offer a final verdict, only a lasting invitation. Our journey from the first bewildered reports to the precise readings of modern science reveals not a single truth, but a spectrum of profound possibilities. We have walked the ground between warfare and ritual, between catastrophic accident and deliberate ceremony. Each theory, from strategic denial to sacred offering, illuminates a different facet of the human experience in that distant age, a reflection of the values, fears, and immense capabilities of the people who called these high places home. The forts stand as permanent questions etched into the hills, monuments to a moment of extreme transformation that bridges the solid, material world and the realm of the deeply mysterious. While we may never know the exact thoughts of the person who lit the final torch or felt the ground shake with heat, that uncertainty is itself a gift. It compels us to keep questioning, to keep exploring with both rigorous science and respectful imagination. These sites are a powerful reminder that history is not always a clear, linear record. More often, it is a landscape of deep shadows and sudden, brilliant, fused light, where the full story is held in the silence between the stones. They ask us to respect not just the ingenuity, but the complex emotional and spiritual experiences of our ancestors, whose world we can only partially reconstruct. If this mystery of fire and stone has captivated you, we would love to hear your own reflections. What theory resonates most with you, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to journey with us as we turn to the next enigma waiting in the shadows of the past.